Friends, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is Overcoming Fear and Anxiety. This is going to be the first one of a three-part series. And in this lesson, you are going to learn a little bit about recognizing these patterns of fear and anxiety, but beyond that, how to break them. We're going to learn how to take back the pen of our life so that those future chapters, they are exactly what we want them to be, a product of a conscious creation, and that we can be in absolute control of our story. We're going to dig deep this week and in the next 2 weeks. We're going to get honest about this. We're going to bring in the real tools. And by that, we mean the Gnostic tools. So that we can observe the fear, understand it, see where it comes from, transmute it into something better. Take those elements, reduce them so that they have no more force against our consciousness, that we can operate from a higher level of being. And we're going to do this not by driving denial, not by driving justifications, but with clarity, with action, and with as much truth as we can. And let's go ahead and start by saying, fear is not the enemy. If for us fear is a gatekeeper of change, then we must learn how to open that gate, how to remove that obstacle, and open that gate consciously. So again, we have made this a three-part series. In this first part, what you will see is that we're going to be discussing the origins and the mode of operation of fear. We would like to do that so that we can set a solid foundation out of which we can elaborate from and that we can build upon together. When we come to part 2, we're going to discuss the parasite of fear, how it feeds from us, how it grows, how it controls our behavior, where will we explore the false sentiments of the ego, and we're going to see many of the different phases of fear. Also, how is it that these elements of fear become tyrants, assuming ownership of the human machine? And by the time we get to part 3, we're going to speak about liberation. We're going to speak about tools for transmutation. We're going to speak about courageous action, where we're going to discuss as well invocations, mantras. We will speak about the Gnostic key of SOL, and we are going to cover the topic of psychological annihilation, the death of our fears. So let's get a little bit clinical. There are 3 phases of fear. Fear by itself, well, it's a word that comes from a Greek root word that is phobos. Phobos. From there we see the emergence of phobia. You are familiar with this word. And phobos means flight. And these phobias, these fears, they're just not fears. They all reflect a deeper energetic, deeper spiritual consequences. We can refer to those as traumas. Perhaps to some of us, we could refer to them as wounds, and that would resonate well with us. So these phobias, these fears, there are 3 types of them. And they are people, they are places, and then there is a catch-all category that is pretty much everything else. So there are fears associated to people. These social phobias, or these phobias associated to people, bring with them an element of social anxiety that is the consequence of all of these fears that are in a way very persistent. They are very intense. The key about these social phobias, these fears that we experience around people, is that they are always associated with the quality of our beingness. Notice that we're not saying the quality of our being, we're saying the quality of our beingness, on how do we handle ourselves, how we express ourselves, how we present ourselves, how we project. And these fears have some type of connection to being judged, to being or feeling humiliated, to be rejected in some kind of a social setting. Anything that shakes and rattles the foundation of what you may refer to as your beingness results in one of these. And the problem with these fears is that these fears impair our ability to exist. They impair our ability to openly project our consciousness from its core. So we will avoid speaking up. perhaps at times when we should. We will avoid meeting new people. I mean, the consideration of meeting new people will feel in a way like, no way, I'm not going to do that. I'd rather not go. We would avoid being the center of attention pretty much at whatever the cost. And these fears are paralyzing. They will freeze you right there in place. And all along, the mind runs itself amok with considerations of self-doubt. All of these things invalidate us to one degree or another. I mean, social phobias lead to people being afraid of being seen, of being recognized, even when they do the best of their work. Being recognized in public becomes something exceedingly difficult. They affect you in a way that is physical, because you feel it. You feel the heaviness. You feel the discomfort. You feel it in your skin. They affect you emotionally. As they drain you, they affect you mentally. They affect you spiritually. And what we tend to do is just to try to seek some distancing, to create some separation, and that separation, to avoid the social phobias, well, results in relationships that, because there's not enough frequent contact, they get damaged. People are no longer close to us, and you know how they say out of sight, out of mind, and many relationships just get damaged. Then there are fears that are associated to space, and these are recognized as spatial phobias. But the issue here is not the fear about the space itself. The fear here is about losing control in an open space. It is the issue of feeling vulnerable while you are out there in an open space. And so people will try to stay away from crowds and crowded places because they don't know what to expect. The environment feels so charged and so out of control that they feel powerless before them. So they would avoid very useful services, like, for example, public transportation. They will avoid wide open areas, and they consider that it is way safer just to stay at home. So fears that have to do with this concept of control and space, they are known as agoraphobias. These phobias, any type of consideration of being vulnerable is considered as a bad thing. I mean, walls are seen as good. The smaller, the tighter the space, the more comfortable it starts feeling. And sometimes when those walls are not physically there, we start creating them psychologically. In a way, these psychological aggregates of these spatial phobias, they will try to create some kind of protective shield around you, isolating the core of your being from transactions and everything else, because it feels that it will not be able to handle any of that. So notice that these are very complex fabrications of the mind. The immediate consideration that out there, outside, is chaotic. That constant feel that you must feel safe. Whenever that gets threatened, there are feelings, sensations of panic. There are judgments that are imposed against oneself, and there is a feeling of helplessness. I mean, the thing in the mind is, what could happen? What could I do? And then there is that third fear, that third type of phobia, which is the fear of everything else. I mean, and this one is super complex. These fears, there are more than 500 of them. And every year, all of these books that are responsible for documenting and tracking these conditions of the mind, they keep growing. So in these fears of everything else, anything can be considered a threat. Anything can be fear-inducing. I mean, needles, clowns, darkness, dogs, worms, for many people, holes, smells, spiders. I mean, the list seems to be like unending, never ending. We share these, and we tell you we are not sharing these to trigger anyone. As a matter of fact, we are here in this safe environment, and we're here to share and learn. So none of these things that we're mentioning here have any power over you, except they give you the opportunity to learn a little bit more about them. So all of those things and so many others, they can be considered a threat. So this is a psychological aggregate, of course, in the mind that is fixated. It is fixated to objects. It is fixated to situations, to circumstances. It manifests and is constantly generating subconscious reactions that make these fears automatic. There is no opportunity for the intellect to even make use of its most basic ability to rationalize or logic. No. And of course, these fears, just like all the others, they are debilitating and they are paralyzing. So imagine what the effect can be in anyone's psyche, when two or more of these fears all become active simultaneously. Imagine, like experiencing the fear of going outside combined with the fear of an enclosed space. You do not want to go outside. You cannot be inside. Imagine the fear, the combination of fear of going outside or the fear of staying in here with people that create for us some degree of anxiety. I mean, it can become overwhelming, and we understand that. Because all of these conditions, when they come together, they invite the mind to fall into a chaotic spiral. I fear this, I fear that. I must create a barrier. I must create a protection. No. This is what these aggregates seek to do. So allow me to tell you this. By no means are we suggesting that you, even for a second, should think, not even for a second, oh, all these combinations, what are these? I had not thought of that. New fear unlocked. No, not at all. We want you to be aware of these effects, because the moment that you bring that light of the consciousness into it, that starts making a constructive difference. It helps us to start seeing aspects of ourselves that we had not maybe seen before. Maybe aspects that we have seen and we have pushed aside and had not acknowledged in the past. And we must do something. If you're here and you're attentively listening to this, it is because there is a magnetic center in you that knows that it can create a difference. So we are here to help cause that difference. Because if we don't do anything, doing nothing means that our thinking process is going to continue getting more erratic. There's going to be no ability to discern between what is fact and what is fiction. We will not be able to tell what is important and what is not. Our emotion is going to continue eroding into a way that it becomes more and more chaotic, more and more sensitive, more and more vulnerable to any external impulse. And while this happens, it is going to continue draining the vitality of your body. You're going to continue to feel drained after simple transactions, after simple events. And this consideration, this idea from these many psychological aggregates that we need to be secure and we must fabricate protections, create more barriers, is going to further isolate us, making of this a problem that will continue to get bigger. So, in his writings, in the book, The Fundamentals of Gnostic Education, Samael Aun Weor says this: fear and the search for security have turned planet Earth into a dreadful hell. You experience fears. We experience fears. We know this to be true. So right now, we can focus on either building a never-ending wall of security. We could continue trying to stack safeties and protections one on top of the other, or we can embrace a fundamental teaching from the universal law of action and consequence. Many of you know that law to be the law of karma. And that fundamental teaching is, if you change the cause, you modify the effect. And we would suggest that rather than continuing to build barriers around us, rather than trying to continue adding safeties and psychological protections, we are better off observing, comprehending, and seeking to change the cause so that the effect is different. We think maybe we have convinced ourselves that we can afford to continue stacking safeties and protections to the point where eventually later on the mind is no longer going to be able to account for everything that it has created, or everything that it has, and everything that is still missing. I mean, it will get daunting. We can maybe think now that we can embrace the opportunity just to creating separation, distance from people, from circumstances, from spaces, and live in a total and complete isolation. But that is not living. We are given this opportunity with these bodies, with all of their latent faculties, powers, and abilities, that all we have to do is work to awaken them. And we cannot just close the door on that opportunity, because that would not be living. If we were to do that, I mean, that would be equivalent us giving away our ability to live as a perfectly functioning three-dimensional human being. And we would give that ability away because we would give away our ability to make use of a superior concept and a higher degree of reasoning. If we ever do that, if we choose to not dress ourselves with courage and seek to observe and comprehend, etc., giving away our ability to use concept, our ability to use that reasoning, will drop us down from a three-dimensional space into a two-dimensional type of animal. And as an animal creature, just of the human flavor, if we fall into that two-dimensional space as an animal, that means that we're only going to be operating out of intentions. Not intentions, out of our emotions. And if these emotions continue getting chaotic and more unbearable, and we continue suppressing those feelings, we're going to start suppressing those emotions. And the moment we suppress those emotions as a two-dimensional animal, as a two-dimensional organism, we have no other option than to fall into the one-dimensional space. And that is because when you choose not to feel, you naturally start gravitating to living the life of a one-dimensional being. You're moving just in one direction, and the moment you feel something that is uncomfortable, you turn and you keep going in that direction, and then once again something feels uncomfortable, you turn again. I mean, living a life that whatever gives you a sense of discomfort, you then seek to avoid it at all costs. That would be pretty much equivalent to living the life of a snail. I mean, the life of a jellyfish, the life of one of these one-dimensional creatures, of a sponge, of an animal, of a tardigrade, living mechanically, living instinctively. We don't want to fall into that space. We want to give ourselves an opportunity to thrive. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a timeout. Let's understand what these fears are. Let's understand how they originate and the part that they play within our psyche. Because, again, when we understand them, we become empowered to comprehend them. And through comprehension, we can achieve elimination. So let's suppose that we're all choosing to return right now to an internal condition of bountiful, plentiful happiness. Let's choose for a second that we right now are seeking to achieve an internal state that is mighty like a wonderful cedar tree. A tree that has deep roots of emotional stability, a tree that is flexible enough, and that flexibility then becomes our mental flexibility, a flexibility that is necessary so that we can endure the great storms of the mind. You see, if we set ourselves in that inner state. That will lead us to enjoy some psychological freedom, and it will move us into a space of peace, of good, abundant peace. So let's talk a little bit about how is it that fear originates. We will tell you this. Fear begins where our consciousness ends. We don't want this to sound counterproductive. We know that the consciousness is eternal. We know that it is ever expansive. But let's not speak of the consciousness, of our consciousness, as that in its aspect of the psychic material that you and I have been given so that we can fabricate a consciousness, a soul, so we can fabricate a soul. Let's think of the consciousness in this term in its context of our degree of awareness. So fear begins where our consciousness, our degree of awareness has ended. Let's go a little bit deeper and understand why is it that fear takes root. If you were to go to ask one of the many AI counselors that exist out there, and you ask about fear, it will tell you that fear has deep roots in both our evolutionary history and our personal experiences. From an evolutionary perspective, it will tell you that fear came along as a mechanism of survival, and it would encourage us to respond to threats so that we could steer clear of danger. If we go back to a few seconds ago, that feels like a unidimensional type of organism. There is something there. I don't like that. We go in another direction. We seek a little bit more than that. Okay? So for all purposes, this information right here feels a little dry, feels a little cold, maybe a little bit clinical. We need something that is more relatable. We need an explanation that penetrates deep into our understanding so that it becomes a part of our consciousness, so that it becomes part of our esoteric work, something that we never forget, that operates deep within the wisdom of the consciousness itself. So we don't want what we learn today to become just a fleeting memory. We don't want what we learn today just to become something that is forgotten later today, tomorrow, maybe next week. We don't want what we learn to be manipulated, corrupted. We want this teaching to become part of our interior mind, part of our esoteric work, an integral part of our knowledge, something that becomes immutable even in the face of our greatest adversities. That will help us become grounded. With that, we will not be experiencing any stress. We will be emotionally stable. We will remain in a space of good mental calmness. So, because we are wired for stories, we have always been wired for stories. Stories have been good for us because they have helped us make good sense of the world. I mean, before science, before therapy, even before we had words for how we were feeling, we were telling each other stories. Stories, in a way, helped us survive. Let's help create a story out of how is it that we can do this. In the story of our lives, at some point, something happened. There was an initial moment where we had that very first experience where the consequence resulted in fear. That event, it doesn't matter what event it was significant enough to become an integral part of the main plot of our story. That event became easy to remember because it pushed us out of a comfort zone where we were standing. And some events, they pushed us a little. They did not do much. But other events pushed us over the edge. It doesn't matter when or where that happened in the chain of lifetimes that we have been living. The fact is that when those events happened, we were not ready for them. We were distracted, and the event caught us by surprise. When that surprise happened, we did not transform it. Rather than transforming that event, in the shock of that surprise, you and I remain under the consideration, I am a victim to this. And there's no blame behind that. I mean, many of those events had physical consequences, whether it was in this life or in one or many of our past lives. Many of those events had physical consequences. Others of those events, they had deep emotional effects. Some other events, they crippled the mental foundations that we had about many different things. And the suffering that came from these particular events led us to one simple realization: I am vulnerable. That's it. That caught me by surprise. I was not ready. I am vulnerable. And instinctively, you took note. And somehow we told ourselves, I don't want this ever again. Rather than transforming the event, we said, I don't want this ever again. I mean, we may not remember any of these original events. I'm sure that they have been written in many of the different chapters of our life. But I tell you this, you may not remember them now, but these events all exist within the mind. And fear hijacks the mind. Let's make a distinction. The brain is not the mind. The brain is an instrument of the mind. And sometimes the brain will perceive from that vast collection of memories that exists within the mind. And when it perceives from there, it will perceive at levels below the radar of your intellect. Your brain will perceive things, events, circumstances from the vastness collection of the mind. And it will do so without you even realizing that. And every time that happens, the brain has effectively been able to gather some information from something, from levels that exist within the subconscious. In many cases, the infraconscious aspects of our psyche. Within the subconscious, we carry many hidden memories. We carry our traumas, our desires. We carry mental matter that operates below the level of our awareness. All of those things that exist within that subconsciousness, to one degree of development or another, they are all egos. But there's something below the level of the subconscious, and that is the infraconscious. That is the one that is below the subconscious. And within the infraconscious, what exists are aspects of us that are devolving. These are inferior aspects of ourselves that are, again, devolving, things that can be destructive, that can be self-sabotaging, things that can be chaotic. So if you have ever experienced hatred, tendencies to do black magic, inferior urges like murderous impulses, all of that exists within the infraconscious aspect of our psyche. And our brain detects from those areas without you even realizing. And when it does, you feel it within your body. You feel it in your emotions. Suddenly, one thing here seems similar to one of those many past events. The brain will grab that, and suddenly you have this cascade of reactions going through your body, and you experience that fear. So if we could just bottle this here at this point in our dissertation, let us tell you that fear is a reaction to a story that you tell yourself about something that has taken you out of your comfort zone. This fear is an agreement that you have made within you. I will do everything I can for this to not happen again. I don't want this to happen again. And the moment that happens, you feel the shock. This is what fear is. Consciously or subconsciously, we continue to perceive conditions. We perceive causes. We perceive circumstances that are similar to past events. Events that happen in this life and that happen in many past lives before this one. And the comparative processes of logic that happen in the brain, because the brain is a really good machine just to do comparisons. It compares this to that, and it finds what is the same, what is not, and it generates chemical reactions from that. So that comparative process of logic, they prompt the brain to then look into that cloud that is the mind. It performs its own data search, and inevitably, we have had so many lives that it comes across stuff. It finds something that is similar. And when it finds them, it brings about those past sentiments of fear. But let me tell you this. When the brain perceives, it's important that you understand this. The brain does not know when it is perceiving from that vast cloud of the mind or when it is perceiving from the senses. The brain does not know the difference between what is out there and what is happening in here. And this is how our fears become habitual. This happens because the brain not only perceives from that vast cloud of the mind, the brain perceives from the senses, and once it receives that information, it starts regulating physical processes of the body. Physical processes that many of them are moved by instinctive impulses. And the moment that it comes across a past shock that has not been transformed, it sees that as happening now. Why does the brain think that? Because the vastness of the mind exists within the eternity. Within the eternity, the past, the present, and the future all converge into an instantaneous moment of now. So the brain will find something and it says, now. I got this. The reaction must happen now. And those reactions start taking place. Let me tell you what happens at the level of the body. And we're going to do this from a bird's eye view, just so that you can see the flow of the biology. The first thing that happens is that the amygdala, at the very center, at the core of the brain, it detects that there is an ego of fear. Once that happens, the hypothalamus, which is the master control center, starts sending signals to the body. As that happens, the hippocampus sees the event. It sees the event in the mind even if you don't. And the pituitary gland, which is also known as the master gland, starts sending neurotransmitters and other chemicals into the bloodstream. While that body of yours is getting flooded with hormones and neurotransmitters, the prefrontal cortex is trying to create some sort of rational assessment of what is happening. But while that is happening, your endocrine system is already pumping hormones throughout your body, and suddenly your body is dealing with shocks of adrenaline. That is a stress hormone. Cortisol, that is a stress hormone. Something called glutamate. Glutamate is a fear conditioning hormone. But you're also receiving dopamine, because dopamine is associated to fear, learning, and anticipation. And those are just a handful of the many things that just flood your bloodstream and start going everywhere in your body. Suddenly your body is flooded. Again, hormones and neurotransmitters, simply because something happened here. Your brain, as it looked into the vast cloud of the mind, was able to find an event that happened in this life or in one or more past lives. It brings them to the present moment as now, and boom, there go all those chemical reactions. Suddenly you start feeling jitters, and you start feeling butterflies in your stomach. You start feeling goosebumps in your skin. Your hands get cold and sweaty. Your eyes dilate. You're looking around. All of this is happening simply because of that. And the more this happens, the more your body gets conditioned to having all of this abundance of chemistries floating around in the bloodstream. And when it's missing them, the ego creates more circumstances that bring about more conditions of fear so that it can enjoy of all of that. And I tell you this, while that is happening, this is very difficult because this does not happen for free. There is a price to pay for this. Each instance of fear reduces the available consciousness. Every instance of fear takes away from whatever consciousness you still have awakened within you. There is also a huge consumption of your creative energy. This is why fear leaves you drained. These events happen, and after they're past, you feel like you have no energy. You feel like you're done. You would rather throw yourself in a bed, cover yourself with a big blanket. This is all because of the incorrect flow of our creative energies. Every time that this happens, that we have this incorrect flow of our creative energy through our body, it results in old egos of fear getting stronger, evoking old psychological aggregates of fear. When all of this happens to the body, they take that and they harden themselves. And if it is a new fear, all that creative energy that was demanded from you results in a new ego of fear. So what I'm telling you is, it is not just one element of fear. It is that we have as many egos of fear as many fears we have today. And regarding the effect in the consciousness, the impact that takes place on this divine material that you and I have been given so that we can create a soul, fabricate a soul. Well, when a new ego is formed, there is a little piece of that consciousness that is taken away and is now bottled within that defect, within that new ego. We lose another little fraction of our consciousness, like taking a little spark of that light, and we trap it within that cage of that ego. And when it comes to existing egos, those egos take that creative energy and they become more dense. They become more solid. And they trap the consciousness then in a cage that is denser, that is heavier. And as the consciousness becomes weaker, every time we keep fractionating the consciousness in this way, well, we end up being more unaware of our actions. Maybe we should say the consciousness becomes even further unaware of the consequences of its actions, of the consequences of its creations. And there's only one result: more confusion, more subconsciousness, more irrationality, certainly more chaos. This is what happens. Now, we have already given you a hint. There must be a need to transform that event. We have to take that event, that circumstance, and we have to integrate it. Let's think about these circumstances. Let's you and I do a very brief mental experiment so that we can see these things coming into play. So imagine for a second how many times you and I have gone through these cycles. I mean, when somebody scared you, you walked past the door, somebody went, ah. You went, ah. That's the situation of fear. Imagine those other circumstances where somebody threatened you mentally, threaten you psychologically, emotionally, maybe threaten you physically, not transforming that. That had an effect in our creative waters, in our creative energy, in hardening egos of fear, in creating new egos. Imagine those instances where you misbehaved, where you became fearful of the consequences of your actions. Imagine times in your life when you were judged, where there was doubt, where you were unsure, uncertain, and now that uncertainty led to a manifestation of fear. You see, you and I have managed many of these conditions successfully. Many times some people have judged you, you have been like, you have brushed it off and this is irrelevant. No consequence. But there have been many other times in which we have not been able to manage this successfully. And we have integrated many of these events, both as part of what we can handle comfortably within our comfort zone, and some others that have pushed us over the edge. We have already classified them as those bad events. The nice thing about this is that you already have faith. Faith here is not hope. It is not anticipation of something good. Faith means that you have already the experiential knowledge that tells you that you have already been able to take many of these conditions and bring them into your comfort zone, and now they have no power over you. You have been able to get close enough to these circumstances that you have seen this was really not that bad. I overcame this successfully. I have been able to be over that. I took a lesson. I learned from that. You see them now, and you can see that they are no longer threatening. If they happen again, these are things that you can tolerate. These are things that you can handle. And that is because there was an effort and a conscious exercise to see there, to be there, to perceive at the moment, and take the lesson from it. But the ones that we did not integrate, the ones that pushed us over the edge and that we already classified, those, when they flowed, they come and they hit us with the harshness of a raw impression that goes straight into the mind. I'm pointing my head, but not because the brain is the mind, but because the brain is an instrument of the mind. They flow like a raw impression that reach the mind, and they get there without being transformed. And as a collective, there is an effect. There are many shocks that go through the 5 senses of the human machine. There are shocks that go through the intellect, shocks that go through the emotional center, through the motor, sexual, instinctive centers. And when they appear in the mind, they crystallize as an image, as a framed image. And each image is very vivid in sensations, in perceptions, in colors, in feelings, in emotions, etc. As some of these come along, they shock us, and our reaction is very simple. For example, as one of these events, one of these loaded images with information that exists within the vastness of the cloud of the mind, as our brain perceives them, they will come and shock us, but they will shock us in a way that is very light. I mean, you will see it and you will experience like a cringe, like maybe you feel a little tilted, I don't know. But it will be something similar, something manageable. But we know that there are some of those events that they shake us to our core. It is like an internal shock that even for an instant, they leave us paralyzed. And if the intellect cannot deal with that, if the intellect cannot be able to process what that is, something has to step up. Because something within you has to enable taking charge of it to help keep you moving forward. And if the intellect is not able to effectively rely on a superior level of thinking, on a superior ability of perception and handling that with a logic that is superior to the one that we have today in the mind, then what has to step up is our instinctive center. And when it is the instinct, the one that is responding to that, there is an inferior animal part of our psyche that is what's coming into play. And we may try to pretend that many of these things that show up in our mind at times, that they don't exist. We will try to avoid them, reject them, we will try to suppress them, but eventually the force required to deal with them becomes very significant. As a weight, they become unbearable, and it is too much to deal with. So the intellect starts relying on the instinct. The intellect, because of the way that the ego plays with those many receptors of the mind, the ego perceives these things in ways that are incorrect, and it says, yeah, we have not dealt with this before. We let the instinctive handle with it. So the intellect starts relying on the intellect to deal with that. And the instinct always reacts. Because the instinct does not know anything different than react to something. And every reaction of the instinct then results in a further response from the intellect, like in a cycle. And this is how the intellect starts creating psychological barriers of protection. Can't deal with that. The intellect says, we're going to fight it, or are we going to run away? I cannot run away. I cannot deal with that. I cannot fight it. We need to create barriers. And we start creating then all of these barriers and distances and separation from each other. Okay? To a degree, we can handle that, more or less. But there always comes a time. It always comes a time that inevitably some conditions will manifest in ways that the instinctive center will not be able to overcome them. And we will have then moments in our life where the shock of some experiences are going to break through those psychological barriers that we have created. And when they break through those psychological barriers, not only we have to go through the consequences of fear, but with all the other inferior aspects of the mind, all of those inferior aspects of the ego and the chatter of the ego pushing you further into a state of victimhood. And after we have been in a state of victimhood for a little bit, there is a sense of defeatism that starts creating in us. A psychological song. And it is a song that we start singing to ourselves. It is a song that sounds like some kind of a lasting agreement where we tell ourselves, I accept this as traumatic. And I have surrendered my peace to it. You see, these agreements, the power of the word is so intense that all these agreements become mental formations. And just the potentiality of repeating the trauma, of anything remotely similar to what that thing was, becomes a threat. And the psychological song continues. I was not able to handle that. And if I'm not protected now, I'm not going to have peace. And as that song continues playing, what it's telling you is, oh, it happened before. It can happen again. You see, you have this fear. This fear is going to help you stay protected because you're going to keep your barriers up. And when you prepare for the worst, you will avoid the pain. You need to start figuring out how to predict this, how to control this, set mechanisms of defense, keep yourself separated. This is what the song continues to sing in the mind. This is what the psychological aggregates of fear are singing there. And as a consequence, at some point, there is some action taken. I need distance. I need to keep all of these protections in place because they will keep me safe. And that is a lie. We tend to think, when I prepare for the worst, I will avoid the pain. We know that that is not true. We say, preparedness, that requires me to be able to learn to predict, see from where the thing is coming. We need to control it. We know that that doesn't work all the time. And all of these protections that are nothing more than artifices of the mind start being built around us. And the moment that something puts the quality, the validity, the consideration that your protections are vulnerable, you start experiencing anxiety. The moment something prompts into question the effectiveness of your mechanisms, you start experiencing those episodes of anxiety. And does the psychological aggregate of anxiety says? It says, if I let this thing touch me, I'm going to lose myself again. No. We are here to break from the cycle. We are here to observe, to comprehend, to eliminate these psychological aggregates of anxiety, of fear, of so many different aspects of pride. So let's take a look at what is the metaphysical framework for this. Let's see how is it that this flows within the construct of the microcosmic man, because there is a fundamental hermetic principle that you have heard before that says, as above, so below. That, my friend, is the hermetic principle of correspondence. And if we look at what is this metaphysical framework, if we understand how is it that these things happen out there within the vastness of the universe, then we can see how is it that they happen also within the mind and within the cosmos that is you and me as a microcosmic man. Let me tell you this. As creation flows, there is something responsible for crystallizing everything in creation. And that is known as the ray of Okidanok. This ray of Okidanok is a ray of creation that emanates from beyond what is known as the crown of life. The ray of Okidanok exists before the concept of what you and I refer to generically as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Before that beingness, that powerful manifestation comes to be, the ray of Okidanok already exists, because Okidanok emerges from the uncreated light and it emerges from the manifestation of the uncreated space. The fusion of the Ain and the Ein Sof lead into that flow of the ray of creation. And that ray is known as the ray of Okidanok. And as this flow descends from the vastness of the cosmos, there is an impulse that leads that ray to manifest and be created. That impulse exists within you and me as part of our willpower, as part of our force of causation. And within the microcosmic man, it is the impulse of cause what leads to things to take place. These impulses are causal in nature, and when we crystallize words like I don't want this ever to happen again, what follows from that moment forward are mental formations that seek to address that cause. When the mental formations have been created, there is an emotion that goes behind that mental form. And behind that emotion, there is energy necessary to crystallize it. So it has to come from your vitality. Ultimately, these barriers being created here within the physical plane. So whenever there is an impulse to create, that impulse sparks within that causal plane of creation, and from there it enables the flow of a mental form. And we said at the beginning, if we modify the cause, we can modify the effect. Remember, every effect becomes by itself a new cause, and every cause always generates a new effect. So our causal impulse must go into modifying those old causes. If there's a mental formation that takes place in us because of whatever we have postulated, this mental formation comes from a mental reference that, in cases of fear, has been associated with an event. That mental formation is safely stored within the vastness of the mind. Once that mental formation exists, as the ray of creation descends, remember, it goes from an impulse of causation to a mental formation to be dressed with emotion. Well, at that moment, it becomes adorned with emotion, and that emotion exists within the astral plane. In your body, it exists within your emotional center, that is 3 fingers above your navel, in that area in your solar plexus that is known as the enteric system. And that emotion is any of the many different infinite degrees of, in the case of fear, of any type of fear that you can experience against something. I mean, somebody may give you a coffee that is not sweet enough, and you may taste it and go, what is that? I mean, you can tolerate that, you can handle that. You don't become paralyzed because of that, because that one is a very minuscule degree of fear. I mean, and we say that because somebody tells you, do you like coffee without sugar? You say, no. Okay, I'm going to give you coffee without sugar. You say, no, don't do that. That's as much as you go into the fear. Very superficial. But for others, the emotion that adorns it, if we don't keep this in check, is going to be of a very dramatic, vast difference. But regardless of what that emotion is, there is always a draw from your creative powers. There is always a pull from your sexual creative center so that that thing can become crystallized as a creation. And it crystallizes as a creation within the ethereal plane of creation. That ethereal plane is your vital plane. It is where you have your vital body exists. And it takes from your source of creative powers. And eventually it crystallizes, it materializes here in this realm of substance. And when it crystallizes here, it crystallizes with all of its consequences. So fear is that emotion. Every time that we allow those events unprocessed, every time that we allow for the creation of a new defect of fear, a new ego of fear, or we harden the old ones, well, those negative emotions continue rewriting the story of our life. And as this happens, it starts planting seeds. Because these are like bad weeds with many bad seeds. And it starts planting seeds of doubt that then start putting into question the effectiveness of all the other protections that you thought that you had. And now you not only have fears, but now you have anxieties. And anxiety hijacks the mind. It runs its own version of reality. And in that story, when anxiety is kicking in, you're powerless, you're exposed, you're vulnerable, and you're always on the edge. The thing is, if you do not catch it, if you are not able to bring a stop to it, you're going to start believing those skewed versions of reality. And you will live that, because the ray of creation will take that down from that cause into a crystallized form in the physical plane. And this is why, in his writings of the Yellow Book, Samael Aun Weor says, as a sincere seeker, if you're looking at making a transformation, as a devotee, You must conquer fear if you seek to advance in developing your inner powers. We must eradicate all of these elements of fear. Friends, there is simply no way that we can make internal spiritual progress by developing our spiritual faculties, our powers, our virtues, our abilities, etc., unless we conquer fear. And conquering fear means we have to find it, we have to comprehend it, and we have to eliminate it. We have to work with powers that are superior to the mind, and we must understand they must be. We have to rely on a power superior to the mind, because everything that we have done with the mind thus far has resulted as useless eliminating these fears. We need a superior force. This is why it is so vital that we understand this. There has to be observation, comprehension, and elimination. This is not something that can be done with a medication. I mean, they help to some extent, but this cannot be done with medication. This cannot be done with hypnosis. This cannot be done with affirmations. If you have tried affirmations, you know that they are very limited in what they can do. They are not going to work for this. Hypnosis is only going to take these aggregates and shove them deeper into the subconsciousness. That is not going to work. We have to make use of whatever consciousness you and I have available today, awake today, available today, and shock that consciousness, empower it in such a way so that the consciousness itself can see the consequences of its own creations. And the way that we can do that with the consciousness is by working intelligently with a cosmic law. As above, so below. Those laws that work up there, they work here within the microcosmic man. We have to learn to work with the law of the Holy Three. Because behind the number 3, that, as you know, is one of those perfect numbers, the 3 is what enables creations always. By working with this law, we can engage in the natural cycles of action of nature. Everything in nature, it is born, it grows, and eventually it devolves, and eventually it dies. See? Consciousness, yeah, it can create, and it can create these aggregates, but it has to bring these aggregates to an end. If it leaves them around, eventually the burden is going to be too much. We have to engage with these 3 forces of nature so that we can bring these cycles to an end, so that we can reduce these aggregates to a cosmic dust, so that rather than keeping them stored indefinitely, carrying them from one life into the other until we run with as many lives we have left, you have to do that, because if not, the only option is for the catabolic forces of nature to run their course. For those forces that exist in the underworld to take these aggregates and destroy them when we don't. And that cosmic law of the Holy Three is known as the cosmic law of the Triyamashikamnu. This law of the 3 speaks that for every creation to manifest, there has to be a holy affirmation, there has to be a holy conciliation, and the holy negation. These 3 forces appear within the Eastern tradition as 3 gunas. And these 3 gunas are a guna of fire, a guna that sustains, and a guna that brings everything to its rightful end. These are rajas, sattva, and tamas. And you see them right here on the screen. I mean, the force that sparks creation is rajas. And that is the first face that you see here in the image. Notice that in his ears, what you see is the sun as a source of fire, a source of life, source of creation. There's a force that sustains creation that is known as sattva. We see it at the very center of the image, and we know that that is sattva because of the abundance of the hair. That long hair is always a symbol of fertility. It's a symbol of chastity, of creation. And of course, we see the symbol of infinity wrapped around the neck, because that symbol of infinity speaks on the neck, on the creative power of the word. And then there is tamas as the force that drives creation to its completion. And we see tamas represented on the final image here on the screen. Notice that the necklace is made of skulls. Ancient wisdom for modern day problems. This law of the Triamashikano is the law that enables creation. And these three forces, these three gunas, are the forces that model all the cycles of creation. Just like a plant grows and eventually bears fruit and eventually perishes and dies, the same thing happens with solar systems, with galaxies, with the cosmos. The same thing happens even with the great cosmic day. Because after a great cosmic day, there is always a great cosmic night. We must learn to use these forces and model these cycles of life and creation, and bring these forces within us so that we, in the same way, can bring these defects to their rightful end. So in subsequent sessions, we're going to explain the thought forms that condition our fears and the internal agreements that cement them. We're going to discuss a little bit about what we are, how we can benefit from the principle of impermanence so that we can transcend into higher, superior levels of being, so that you and I can embark on Jacob's ladder. Remember that story from Jacob, that he anointed the stone, he fell asleep on it, and in his dream, there was a ladder that extended from earth to the heavens, and he saw beings that were rising, were going up the ladder. Wow. So we can do that. And we're going to learn a little bit about how we can break the cycles that create this illusion that we have, that we do so many things when we're just being like puppets reacting to these defects. So in this series, we're going to close with a totally practical session. And in that session, we're going to help explain the method, the science, and the processes that are involved in discovering, observing, and eliminating our defects. We're going to work with the forces of nature so that they can help us navigate along this very narrow path in a way that is very balanced. And we will talk to the method on how to work with forces superior to the mind so that we can bring these defects to our cosmic dust. So when we come again next week, we're going to expose the parasite of fear. We're going to talk about the egoic forces that feed on our pain, and we're going to introduce the tools of conscious self-observation so that we can dissolve them. Dear friends, this is what we wanted to share with you tonight. This has been Conscious Approach to Inner Freedom in this part 1 of Overcoming Fear and Anxiety. Dear friends, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. May all beings be happy.